Content warning. The following show contains smoking, discussions of fictitious violence, some potty mouth language, and of course, some things that may hit an emotional chord. Either way, viewer discretion is advised. Well, you did say something this time. Yeah, I did. All right, well, should we start the music? Yeah, we're going to be here for a minute. Hey everybody, what is going on today? This is Solar Gray, the Cinematic Sorcerer, coming at you from the Wizard's Tower, and welcome, my friends, to the dark side of the room. Wow, my hair just got all crazy, out of control, and this is the show where what do we do? What is the thing that we do? We talk about games and hobbies and escapism and all of that jazz. And of course, we talk to you guys about your hobbies and all of that other stuff. But before we get started, I want to say thank you for the people that showed up, because we are going to be talking about a subject very, very near and dear to me today. And that is, what is that? Well, today, our subject is the importance of fluff and crunch. And thank you very much, Neon Arlecchino, for putting up the link to our Discord. So, what I'm doing right now, okay, this is the real talk and all that stuff. We have a lot of stuff to go with and deal with on all this jazz. So, what I'm putting up right now, there we go, all right, is to get all that stuff done and out there. And of course, if you guys, and I mean this, if you guys really want to reach out, tell us what you think, participate in the show a little bit there, because I like reading comments and all that jazz, you guys can send a email to backinthedeck@gmail.com. It's BACKINTHEDECK@gmail.com. You can also reach out to me at the social media things, because they love taking over someone's life and all that stuff. The social media, of course, I'm talking about is Twitter and Instagram at backinthedeck. You can also hit me up on TikTok. And joining the Facebook group Deckers on the Book gives you access to the rest of the Deckers out here. That's right. We have so many cool people in our community, and that is super duper awesome. And of course, if you guys just happen to find any value in what we're doing, well, guess what? You guys can help us out by subscribing right over here on Twitch using the Jeff Bezos money with your free Twitch subscription, and that won't cost you a dime, but that will help us out a lot. And when I say help us out a lot, I've been on the phone all day trying to get my food stamps reinstated, like real talk on all that. And of course, you can always hit one of the links right here that I just put up to our merch store and all of those other places, even a one-time donation to PayPal. That's right, you guys can spot me an actual cup of coffee. So now that we got all that stuff going, we got a pretty long show today. As you guys know, I've literally been what's the term? Well, I have been scaling back my show production and all that jazz. So instead of 5 days a week, we're here 3 days a week with shows twice as long, which means actually I'm netting longer hours. So now that I know what is up with all that, I got the coffee going. So the whole thing between Fluff and Crunch, right? Well, let's set a scene, because I like setting scenes. You get together with a friend of yours and you guys decide to play with your toys, right? But you got a whole bunch of toys. Let's say you pick up something from a yard sale or a garage sale and you go, wow, look at all these little toys. I got soldiers and tanks and all that stuff, and I know some game rules, so let's get together and do some game rules, okay? So you pull out some generic game rules, like, all right, everybody's got a range of 12 inches, and tanks get to roll 3 dice, and soldiers get to roll 2 dice, and there you go, right? And so you do that, and it's pew pew, and it's kind of fun, and all that jazz, okay? But then if somebody says, hey, I got these toy soldiers, let's play with World War One. All right, let's play some World War One, and they pull out the rule book to bolt action. You know, now you've got a setting, you've got your armies. Forget the rules and all that stuff, but you literally have a narrative that you know and that you understand and that you can follow. This has scientifically been proven, citing my source, trust me, bro, to increase engagement in whatever it is that we're doing. I don't care what game you're playing. I don't care what books you're reading. People tend to engage and give more benefit of doubt and more hope and trust into fluff that they're not just familiar with. Ooh, I have a hiccup. But that they actually care about, okay? Are you guys like me in the sense of you sit down to a book series, right? You totally sit down to a book series, and that first 4 chapters is just like, God, get to it already, yeah, because you don't know the setting, you don't know the characters, you don't know the time period. There's just so much fluff that you don't really know. But if your friends tell you, dude, this is pretty good, it's about a sorcerer who lives in Chicago, or this stuff is pretty good, it's about, like, you know, it's about one child out of 20 that decides to turn against their fathers, and they conquer the universe but mess it up in the meantime. You know, that is something that we can grab onto. This is the reason we have trailers. And why do I bring this up? Well, I bring this up, ladies and gentlemen, because when you sit down for a game, and trust me, y'all know I play a lot of games. A lot of games. And I was asked, what one shot am I running from a Thursday night game group? And I'm like, ooh, what could I run? Because I have such a Rolodex of games in my head. And then I think about I guess you can say the years that I've been building up the experience of teaching games, learning games, all that jazz, right? And here's the thing. And this is a serious thing that not a lot of people really think about. But I've always found it more difficult to get people into games that have fluff and properties that they are not familiar with. And understand, I'm Generation X. I could talk about so much about how it was when I was coming up, you know, but it's not even like that. Now, what I will say is, if a lot of people aren't invested in the setting and the fluff and all that jazz, one of two things will happen. They will get bored and wander off, or they will find recourse in game mechanics. Okay? But sorry to tell you guys, but when it comes to game mechanics, unless you are an avid gamer, someone that plays more than 3 games, and I'm not trying to gatekeep here, okay? Just let me cook, all right? Let me cook. But if you don't play more than 3 games, then you test out a game here and a game there and a game there. Most basics of each type of game that you play will make every game feel about the same. Okay? A role-playing game. You're sitting around a table. You have a friend. You and that friend are coming up with stories, and you want to do some stuff. You try and roll some dice, and you see what happens when you roll the dice. That's it. Now, what shape dice, what your numbers, all that is a little bit of crunch, okay? But at the end of it, it's I say stuff, I roll dice, I get told what happened. When you're playing a collectible card game, I don't care if it's Yu-Gi-Oh, Digimon, Magic the Gathering, Legend of Five Rings, Warlord, don't care. You pull out a card, you read the card, you do the effect. There's some sort of resource mechanic so that you can't put your whole hand down at once every time, and then your opponent does it, and then you meet conditions until you win. If you're playing miniatures games, you move a little action figure on a board, you roll some dice, and the action figure either goes pew pew, stabby stabby, runny runny, jumpy jumpy, and then the other one falls down, right? I mean, that's really what happens, all right? Those are the underlying essence of tabletop miniatures games, card games, and of course, tabletop RPGs. So why do so many people care? Well, if you go to any Warhammer 40K board, you go to any HeroClix board, okay? You're actually kind of right, Neon Arlecchino. Saying that is a hopeful description. I find that most miniatures never make it off the painting table. But then you've got things like HeroClix, Dungeons and Dragons, things like that come pre-painted. But anyway, but you get into a discussion of any Warhammer 40K thing and ask, why do people like this game? And you'll get a whole bunch of people coming at you in all caps, the lore! Lore! They just keep saying that word. Lore, 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 lore. And not gonna lie, Warhammer 40K has very thick lore, okay? And when I look back at all the games that I play, all right? All the games that I play, all the games that friends of mine are into and things like that, it really is the fluff that gets people in, okay? A good amount of my friends right now are in live action role-playing game for Fading Suns, which is essentially space opera meets piracy. And they love the idea of building up planets and playing political games and trading resources and economic stuff. That is their jam. Why am I not in that game, you ask? Because that's not really my jam right now. But with all that being said, okay, they love knowing the planets, talking about the ships, talking about the weapons and the technology. Okay, you get into Warhammer 40K, and you get the people saying, "Oh, its lore is second to none. The Warhammer universe can defeat any other side." Right? You get into something like HeroClix or any of the games from Night Models or Atomic Mass, I think it's still called Atomic Mass. It might be called Asmodee at this point. But you get into DC Universe or Marvel Crisis Protocol, and people won't go the lore because it's pop culture. Okay, we got so many comic books, and we're trying to answer that question: can my comic hero beat up your comic hero? And the game mechanics, for most people, are an organized way of getting involved in that fluff in order to immerse yourself into the experience. Let's see. In the medieval era, there was a stew that differed from tavern to tavern. True. This stew would be constantly kept at a boil, and the leftovers would be chucked in. Those would boil unless landed out. Yep. Oh yeah, you're right. Warhammer lore is like a bowl of brown. That's what it is. Just big bowl of brown stew. What do you got? Have a piece of bread and what's in this bowl? As you guys know, I'm new to Warhammer 40k, but I've been playing Dead Zone for years, and I like its lore. I've been playing Grimdark Future for years, and though its lore is very close to 40k, I like its lore. But then there's always the historical reenactments like Bolt Action, or the Weird War 2 like Conflict 47. Any of the games from Chaosium like Delta Green or Call of Cthulhu that throw you in, that throw you into the H.P. Lovecraft universe. Okay? So lore in a gaming system is so important. If you go on Kickstarter right now, you will find hundreds of games with very tight game mechanics. Okay, very tight game mechanics. Their crunch is really well put together, but a lot of them won't really make it because they don't have familiar lore, or we'll get there, Xanathades. Because their lore is either unfamiliar or not really compelling. And see, in this day and age, we are inundated with fluff. Oh my God! Everywhere you turn, there's just fluff. You've got the never-ending fluff from Warhammer 40k. You've also got the never-ending fluff from Warhammer Fantasy. You've got the ever-expanding fluff or lore from Dungeons and Dragons and Call of Cthulhu. You've even got lots and lots of fluff from Magic the Gathering and all their many worlds. But let's take a look outside of gaming, okay? We have 20-something streaming services at our access, all running movies, TV shows, shorts, documentary. We are in a golden age of lore, and we haven't even started on the print medium between comic books and novels. So there's so many different franchises and lore that have their own fluff vying for our attention. How is it possible to grip an audience's attention? Okay, now it's true, once in a while we do get a little whiff of Obi-Wan Sherlock Clouseau, best Inquisitor ever. Best Inquisitor ever, because he uses the Force, and it's elementary how much he uses the Force. But yeah. And thank you for bringing that up, Neon. It really says wonderful things about Tolkien, that his world's lore can stand tall amongst all of the expanding competitors. Yes, it can, primarily because of the three pillars that modern fiction is built on. Okay, we're talking the big three. Okay, technically four. All right, those four pillars being, for horror, H.P. Lovecraft, for science fiction, H.G. Wells, There's a lot of initials in these pillars. For fantasy, J.R. Tolkien, and of course, the initialless title for science fiction, Frank Herbert. Okay, and it's really hard for a person that's not familiar with these genres to take a good look at I'm kind of with you on that, Xanathates, but Stephen King really draws a lot from H.P. Lovecraft because it's hard to escape indescribable horrors even from an author who describes a desk lamp for days and days and days. So yeah, I mean that really is a thing. Hang on, no biggie. So, with all that though, with those 4 pillars, if something is fantasy, I don't care what the geographic location of fantasy, it's gonna be pulling. Really gonna be pulling from Tolkien. If for nothing else, the fantasy races that he kind of canonized back in the 60s. Elves, humans, orcs, dwarves, and insert one other thing here, be it hobbits or ratkin or anything like that. No Tolkien, no D&D, no Tolkien, no 40K, and of course, from the Herbert school, we've also got, Herbert gave us Dune, and from Dune we get things like Game of Thrones, Legends of the Galactic Heroes, Warhammer 40K, just on and on and on. I don't want to get into a history of all these storytellings. Bram Stoker and Mary Shelley kind of set the bar, or kind of set the genres as they are, but really there are more. When you take a look at modern fiction, okay, when you take a look at modern fiction, and I'm standing on it, feel free to tell me how I'm wrong, but when you take a look at modern fiction, there's more Cthulhu mythos, like more stories set around or using elements for the Cthulhu mythos than there are from Frankenstein. Don't get me wrong, H.P. Lovecraft did pull from Shelley with the whole Reanimator thing. All right, don't think I don't know what I'm talking about on this. I don't have many friends, so I read a lot. But yeah. So when it comes to all this, we've got a lot that comes down from those 4 pillars. And see, I have to bring this up because 90% of the role-playing games, card games, tabletop miniatures games are gonna be pulling from these 4 elements, especially Tolkien. Especially Tolkien. You've got 40K, whose lore is second to none, still pulling from elves, dwarves, all that other stuff. You've got that stuff in space or in a dark universe where you're actually playing the forces of Mordor. If you're human, y'all know what I'm talking about. If you're pulling Magic the Gathering, straight out of Tolkien, okay? Seriously, straight out of Tolkien, a card game with magic, that kind of thing. So yeah, I mean, really what it comes down to is, since all these things are interconnected, when you're dealing with a new player, the number one thing in this day and age they're going to look for is derivative and how they can mock it. Oh, well, that's just Tolkien. All right, that's just the whole thing. One of my favorite tabletop miniatures games right now is Carnivale. I love Carnivale. Makes me feel like I'm playing Assassin's Creed, okay? But when a new player is introduced to Carnivale as their first tabletop role-playing game, or their first tabletop war game, their tabletop minis, they go, okay, so my character moves, it does a thing, that's it. But when you explain to them that it's an alternate pass where you have Venice in the 1700s. But there's been some sort of dark Lovecraftian void that's been opened up out of the nothing and the nowheres. And our people, our characters are trying to make a living while running from the Vatican, or they're the city guard. That's, once they have a context, they go, that seems like a pretty cool thing. I have a friend who kind of digs the tabletop mini wargaming, but they're very, 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 very new. And I started them out with Grimdark Future, okay? Because it's like 40K, but it's much more lightweight, much more streamlined, simplified, but not easy. Huh? Yeah, that was me totally almost taking someone's what is the term I'm looking for? Current slogan. But they enjoyed the game. It was cool. It was fun. It was alright. But when I gave them the choice of which mini war game they wanted to learn from me, did they want high fantasy where your wizard takes a bunch of people out to find treasure and magical items before the bad guy gets them in the land of Frostgrave? They were like, not really feeling fantasy. I'm like, what about post-apocalyptic race cars where you're trying to win races in order to make enough money to leave Earth and live with the rich people on Mars? He's like, all right, that sounds kind of dope, but can we do something other than racing? I'm like, okay, Gaslands is out. And when I broke down the lore, he chose Dead Zone. He's like, you know what? Yeah, this kind of reminds me a lot of Halo, or like Halo and Blade Runner. Mixing two familiar lores to a place where he could grab onto the lore and understand what's happening. Because here's the thing. My lovely Deckers, all right? My lovely, lovely Deckers. Every game that you play with a person has got to have a balance between that fluff and that crunch. Why are we rolling these dice? Why are we moving these toys? Or more to the point, why should I care about this and not spend the 2 hours playing this game? Or why should I spend the 2 hours playing this game when I can spend that same 2 hours laughing at stuff on TikTok? It's sad. It's really sad, but it's indicative of the times that we live in. However, it's TikTok now. Earlier on, it was comic books. Earlier, it was things like comic books and after-school cartoons. So the real question is, why should I bother playing these games when I can do something that I'm already engaged in? What's my purpose for learning? And the answer to that question is the fluff, is the lore. We get into these things and we go, wow, the lore is amazing. This is some really fun stuff, One of the games that I got into for a long time, it was my main miniatures game for over a decade. I loved the lore. I picked my faction based on the lore, okay? And that was War Machine from Privateer Press. I had access to War Machine Prime, which was, the main book. And I sat down and I started reading some of the stuff with the different factions. And I'm like, okay, the game is kind of steampunky. I kind of dig that. Okay, yeah, these are the overall commanders, the Ken and Ryu of the game with Signar and Khador. We got the Russians and we got the British. All right, I see that. Okay, yeah, the Kriegs. Well, you got to have your undead. You always got to have your undead. Okay, but when I read their stuff, I read about a dude that was full-on paladin, and he was just praying, and some people tried to come in and rob his cathedral, and he killed them all barehanded while he was essentially sitting in prayer, and then he opened his eyes in prayer and just smited them all. And I'm like, okay, this guy is kind of cool. I think I will look into this. And that was when I picked the Protectorate of Menoth. And then I found out they were the bad guys? wow, but the lore actually had me in. And so when it comes down to getting new players into games, from that point on, I always did my best, really did my best, to tell the people that I'm trying to get into the game the stories. What's going on in this world? What is this world? Because real talk, it is easy to get into mechanics, and we're going to get into that in the second half of the show. Okay? But how many fighting games, for you video game players out there, how many fighting games have the exact same maneuvers and controls as Street Fighter? From what I could tell, the main controller sets that there are in different games come from Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat, and Tekken. Alright, but there are dozens, if not hundreds, of fighting games. I don't care if you're talking Darkstalkers, the three that I previously mentioned, Final Fight, Fatal Fury. I don't care how many fighting games you're out there talking about. The controllers are the same. So what differentiates them? And the answer is the story. The lore behind what's behind all of this. The fluff on this crunch. What flavor nougat do you got in your candy bar? Are you dealing with a Malamar? Are you dealing with a Snickers? Oh, Bloody Roar. Okay, yeah. And when it comes to your games, a lot of people are like, they spend a lot of time wanting really, really, really tight game mechanics. But I'm sorry to tell you guys, there's no such thing as a perfect system, except for the Oingo Boingo fan. If you the Oingo Boingo song, if you know, you know. If not, Google it. Primarily because everything that's produced does not have the budget to be game tested by tens of thousands of people before release. Not even Games Workshop stuff. And I say tens of thousands of people because every single game I've ever seen has a patch or an errata that comes along after it hits the main market, because people who buy the game and play the game find ways to exploit the games, to throw them off balance, and to mess up their crunch that the game testers didn't see before release. And that's why erratas come out. Everything is made by people, therefore nothing is perfect. All right? However, what are the things that really get you into the fluff? Of course, or get you into the game. Of course, there is fun with gameplay. But any person who has tried to learn a new game from the beginning, I'm not talking most of us, I'm talking about the people that were, hey, what's going on, no one, nobody? I'm talking about the people that, how can I put this? I'm talking about y'all family members, all right? Your family members, your significant others that you didn't meet in gaming circles that wonder why you spend so much time doing these things, okay? And I don't care what your hobby is, be it miniatures or, role-playing games or card games or whatever it is, all right? The story thus far, the new content that gets released, that's the stuff that keeps us in. All right? That really is. My main role-playing game for years was the stuff from the World of Darkness, as we were moving toward the apocalypse in all the books. Who's vying for power? Who's trying to survive the apocalypse? How can they do this whole thing? Will it be the werewolves or mages or fairies or vampires? And what wacky ways are the immortal ones using to fill their time? All that stuff was interesting. Okay, yeah, the dice system, roll a bunch of d10s, see which ones come out 6 or above. All right, there you go. That says whether or not you did something, okay? However, when you sit down at a role-playing table, and you sit down with friends, like, I run the Dresden Files role-playing game on the Fate system, and I run into the same problem with the Dresden Files as I ran into with Star Trek and Star Wars and Babylon 5 and Doctor Who, and that is people so familiar with the fluff that metagaming is almost second nature. Okay? I said the other day on the show with Ruthless and Ganja that real talk, it's hard. Hang on, speaking of which, let me tell some people to tune in. Tune in on YouTube. Wait, and mute your phone. Okay. I'm such a bad YouTuber. Bad YouTuber. When I run Dresden Files games, I can't tell you how many people want to hop on a plane and go to Chicago. I really can't. Because they know the books, they know the lore. When you run a Star Wars game, how many people A, want to be Jedi, and B, want to go find Luke and Darth Vader and all that jazz. It's a real thing. But engaging fluff, an engaging story, an engaging world is really important in bringing in new players and keeping them interested. Okay? But how do we transmit that? How do we, as veteran players that are trying to get our girlfriends to play, or our boyfriends to play, or our cousins, or any, like, how do we get people interested? Now, miniatures games tends to be a little easier because all you got to do is invoke their internal Timmy and pull out the really big robot saying, I'm gonna play with this, and then they go, oh, hold up, you got another one of those, pal? Because it invokes that inner 5-year-old. But when it comes to tabletop role-playing games, how do you get people interested in the fluff? Now, when you're playing things like Dungeons and Dragons, okay, and you say, I don't want to bring in licensed properties, okay? It's possible because D&D has been pumping out content for their various worlds for 40 years. Okay, I don't care if you're talking Greyhawk, Scarred Lands, Forgotten Realms, Planescape, Dragonlands, and each one of those things come with 10, 20, 30 books for each one. The lore is thick, and I'm talking about game books. I'm not even touching how many D&D novels there are out there. There are so many expansions on the lore that TSR, followed by Wizards of the Coast, put out there. There's a lot. Okay? Whole lot. All right? When you're dealing with, and I'm doing the low-hanging fruit first. With Call of Cthulhu, hand them a copy of the Dunwich Horror, or which is help me out, Lovecraft fans, the ones where they go to Antarctica and they find the Shoggoth, or the Shoggoth ship. In the Mountains of Madness, yes, hit them up, have them read the short story in the Mountains of Madness, that kind of thing. And, and they'll be like, wow, I'd kind of be interested. And then ask them the questions, what would you have done if you were one of those scientists, or one of those sailors, or the Sherpa bringing them along, Shadowrun and Cyberpunk, always been easy. It has been easy ever since Blade Runner hit the theaters. Okay, you can just say, hey, I'm running a thing like Cyberpunk. Like, hey, did you like the movie Johnny Mnemonic? How about Blade Runner? How about Scanner Darkly? You can bring up stuff like that. Now, I did something interesting last night. For the first time, I watched 2010, which was the official sequel to 2001: A Space Odyssey. And it was a completely different story, completely different feel. But it was really decent sci-fi space opera. Okay, it reminded me so much of Deep Horizon, or was it Deep Horizon? Event Horizon, not Deep Impact. And it had tension and it had all those other things. 2010, the year we made contact. And it was a movie of its time, don't get me wrong, and all that stuff. But it was a decent story told within the confines of Fluff that people had known for 20 years. Do you get me now? It's really easy to drop new players into a setting that they're familiar with, or something that's derivative of a setting that they're familiar with, than it is to introduce them to something wholly new and then to have them try and learn rules on top of it. Okay? When I tell people about Carnivale and how much I love that game, I let them know it's a lot like Assassin's Creed. And I do love me some Assassin's Creed, all right? At least in story, okay? A member of my family definitely loves the Assassin's Creed. I watched a lot of the first two Assassin's Creed games be played, and the idea of running from rooftop to rooftop and jumping off a building and landing on someone stabby thing first, totally awesome. Okay, so when I pitch Carnivale to someone before I set up the table and everything, I'm like, you like Assassin's Creed? You want to try it as like a board game or something? Yeah, check it out. When I pitch things like Warhammer 40K or a Grimdark Future, I'm like, you want to do a Lord of the Rings thing if Sauron had won, but in space? And people kind of go, dude, that actually sounds kind of fire. I'm like, yeah, it sounds kind of fire. And these are ways to get new players interested in some of the things that we do. However, the fastest way to get them out is by chipping their teeth on all the crunch. All right? Whatever do you mean, Solar? Well, today we're talking the balance between fluff and crunch. Okay? There are a lot of different games out there. We know this. We feel this. It is something that is known. Ooh, that is going to be a really full cup. Yes, it is known that there is a lot of games out there that have a lot of rules, Believe me, I see it. And I said on this show that Warhammer 40K was so crunchy, I've chipped 3 of my teeth on the quick start rules, okay? And if you're going to try and introduce a new player, hello viewer, if you're going to try and bring in a new player, the last thing to do is to talk to them about dice percentages and line of sight or big bonuses instead. No, let it go. Okay? The thing that'll get people into it, is to keep the crunch as minimal as possible in the beginning. Okay? But if you're looking to really get into a game, I don't have a ratio. Okay? I don't have the math on that. However, we see a lot of games that have a lot of different mechanics, and gamers okay, the people that actually play gamers, we love feeling clever while talking about the freaking technical stuff. We're like programmers talking about the back end of a website. Y'all know what I'm talking about, okay? How we talk about how we love the dice mechanics or hate the dice mechanics, or the magic system isn't quite right, or the dice system is not exactly granular because I can think of something in the real world that doesn't apply to this game, or there's no way that Deadpool wouldn't win against Superman. Okay? Seriously. There is so much of the stuff. Oh, that's cute. Yeah, baby got backhand. Haha. Yeah, I like big code, and I cannot lie, right? But yeah, when it comes down to it, every good game, every game that we really, really, really play for a long time tends to have some sort of balance between fluff and crunch, okay? And I mean this. I really do mean this. And I don't mean marketing techniques of amazingly good fluff mixed with the sunken cost fallacy so you can never get out of the game. Y'all know who I'm talking about. I'm looking east right now, all the way over the Atlantic, you know. But the dice mechanics are kind of, what's the term? Clunky, hard to remember, not very intuitive, that kind of thing. Or games that are wonderfully balanced and really, really good being put together, but just can't find an audience for its fluff, like Dead Zone, like Carnivale, like Gaslands, you know. When it comes to decent crunch, what is the big question that we look at and ask ourselves? Well, what makes a good rule set? Now, we all have different opinions, but when you look at the data of the games that have been around the longest, okay, what we find is relatively easy to learn, okay, but flexible enough to expand upon. Okay, this is what I'm talking about with the big boys, like all collectible card games. All right, Magic the Gathering, super easy to learn on the front end, and then we've got expansions and power creep and all that other stuff. Hero Clicks is kind of the same way, but it falls under the same category as Magic the Gathering. But a relatively low learning curve mixed with a good story that has the possibility of expanding to more intricate play, okay? Because see, here's the thing, guys. Crunch is very important. There are reasons that you have things like bonuses and penalties and combinations that you can do with the different teams that you might play. I don't care if you're playing Zombicide, Zombies from Twilight Creations. I don't care what game you're playing. Combinations, puzzles, and things that feel engaging and a tad bit intellectually challenging, those make good crunch, all right? And a lot of game designers, heck, a lot of players fall in to a terrible category, which is they want all the crunch, and that's primarily because they learn so quickly. You get where I'm at with this? They'll figure out the game mechanics, and then they're like, okay, I know the basics and everything else is boring. All right? I see this happen so many times. So many times. Like, let's take the game that I shill for the most, okay? And of course, yeah, y'all know I'm talking about the stuff from One Page Rules, okay? Yeah, give me the Grimdark. Okay, love the grimdark firefight, love the grimdark future, love all of that stuff. And why? It's really simple. Okay, it's really simple. The game is very simple on that front end. Everybody moves 6 inches. If you move, you can shoot or punch. If you run, which is double your movement, so 12 inches, you can only punch. And you can't shoot and punch on the same turn. Now you've got your quality, which is what you need to roll on the dice, and your defense, what you need to roll on the dice to avoid being hit from someone who wrote their number on the dice run. And that's it. That's everything you need to know. Oh yeah, and your weapons have an A rating, and that A equals how many dice you roll. It's that simple. All right? And when it comes down to it, that's all you need to know to start learning the game. That's it. That's great. But then when you get into the other factions, okay, when you start getting into factions and start saying these guys get this bonus and this guys get this bonus and these guys get these kinds of dice and these guys are really good from 12 inches or more, and these guys, when they do this happens on this, and if they have this will work. Aha, you've got all of these intertwined things built on a very simple to learn rule set that you can introduce to people little by little by little. Okay, not gonna lie, Warhammer 40k, not that difficult on the front end. Few more numbers, but its target audience were 10-year-olds in the UK. So if a 10-year-old in the UK can do it, a 20 to 30-something-year-old in the US should be able to do it as well. Call me crazy. So, hey, old Two Eyes. What do I like to be called as? Solar. That's my name. So there we go. If you're asking what my pronouns are, I'm a he, him. But, yeah, I mean, that's really where all that comes down. Now, when we look at the crunch of a game, there are so many games that were designed, and you can tell this in their crunch. That's a long, complicated story, but next time I have an AMA, you should tune in. Anyhow, when you have a game that has that's been designed for people who play games, dude, I will tell you, you can tell that this has been designed for gamers and not noobs. Okay? And what do I mean by that? Well, let's take a look at one of the crunchiest of crunch RPGs out there, Pathfinder First Edition. Oh my God. You see, I was there. I was a D&D player when Pathfinder came out. And D&D had a lot of crunch. Didn't have as much crunch as in the old days with second edition, where we had Thaco and your character stats determined what character class you were gonna get. So your first gaming session was 9 hours of rolling dice until you got intelligence high enough to play the wizard that you wanted to play. And you didn't get to Bard until 14th level because it was a multi-class thing. But in 3rd edition, it also became crunch. You had the feats and the prerequisite feats that you needed to get the feats that you wanted, and the prerequisite skills that you had to earn your way up to get the feats that let you get the other feats, and then all of the edge cases that the most pedantic of gamers would put themselves in positions to just throw their GMs off. And a lot of gamers loved it. Okay, they loved it. Not just loved it so much that when 4th edition Dungeons and Dragons, which was a game, came out, they went to the company that said, you know what, that crunch was good, but hold my beer. We are going to make a rule for everything. What is the armor class difference between leather boots and boots that have banded mail or plate mail? Turn to this book on page this much and add that number into what the rest of your armor pieces do individually to see what your armor class actually is. To see whether or not you take 1d4, 1d6, 1d8, or 1d10 of damage. It was a lot. Okay? And was Pathfinder first edition made for was Pathfinder first edition made for brand new gamers that had never played a role-playing game before? God, no. It was not. It was made for the people that was playing that got left behind when they spent all that time, money, and energy learning 3rd and 3.5 and couldn't play D&D anymore because Wizards of the Coast at the time was trying to hook that World of Warcraft audience. Told you, I was there. Well, old Two Eyes, your question of what's my general opinion of 5th edition? It is the best edition of Dungeons and Dragons in every way. I will say that, and I will die on that hill. Okay, it is streamlined exactly the right amount for new players, but it has enough openness in its rules for veteran players to come up with their own magical weapons and their spell combinations. Their cantrips are much clearer than in previous editions, so now I can throw a fireball and light a candle. Isn't that fun? But I can't be a wizard and use heat metal, but that's just me complaining about crunch. I have a big thing about magic systems. And anyone who's been watching this channel for long enough knows my favorite magic system is still Ars Magica. Oh, it's so creative. Just like everybody, so creative, So yeah, that's my thing on 5th edition. However, I was never a big fan of Forgotten Realms. I'm a Dragonlance fan. So if 5th edition had come out with Dragonlance 5 years earlier, oh, I'd be such a shill. I'd be shilling all over the place, because Dragonlance had my favorite fluff, specifically because my intro to D&D was in 2nd edition, and then someone handed me the old Hickman and Weiss novels. Y'all know what I'm talking about. The Dragons of Seasons Time of Day, That's what I call them because winter twilight, summer's dawn, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, so. And yes, Ars Magica does require so much reading. However, it can be summed up with create, control, destroy. Here are the aspects of the laws of physics you control. Don't mess it up. And I dig it. I just dig it. I dig it. I'm like, okay, I can do a whole bunch of stuff. I can do a lot of fast casting. I can be experimental. Unfortunately, the fluff for Ars Magica, not great. Dragonlance definitely had a lower magic level than Forgotten Realms, but it had dragon riders. Come on, man. I would trade a few magic spells and my ability to have clerics to ride a dragon, all right? And see, that's what I'm talking about right there, Zenithades. That is a great mix between fluff and crunch. That is where we try and find balance between the two. Thank you, old Two Eyes. That is actually my favorite fluff in the role-playing games I've run, being the World of Darkness Mage, and I'm talking Mage the Ascension, the old purple book. Yes, Paradox Spirits were kind of stupid from the idea of if you teleport too much, a giant clown will pop out of nowhere and eat you. But it was the 90s, okay? The 90s could be summed up in one word, and one word alone. Extreme! That's just what we were back then. And that's my second favorite magic system, in the sense of I love the way it works, but it became way too easy to become like 20th level god tier magic, okay? you know. So yeah. Um, but the stories, the World of Darkness, the fluff in the World of Darkness, I thought was amazing. Okay. The crunch, it was kind of easy to exploit, but not when you had a good GM or a good storyteller, that whole nature one way, demeanor another way, demeanor the exact opposite, so you're always gathering your willpower back to get those automatic successes. I'm glad they streamlined it in World of Darkness 2.0. I just didn't like the fluff with 2.0. I actually liked the crunch on World of Darkness 2.0 so much better. So to have a good balance between your fluff and crunch, especially when you're trying to lure new players in, these are the back in the deck tips. Okay? Open with, would you like to play a game? Or I'm playing this game that I really dig. Okay? And when they ask about the game that you're playing or that you're interested in, first off, know in your heart if you're talking to someone with really good teeth or someone that likes ice cream, i.e. a person that prefers fluff. I'm talking World of Darkness 2.0, as in the Requiem and the Awakening and all that stuff, versus the Ascension and the Apocalypse and the Masquerade. Get it? Thank you. Find out whether or not the person you're talking to is into crunch or fluff. Okay? And this will determine how much fluff to pitch them and how. Okay? When I convinced a friend of mine, my best friend actually, to play Carnivale with me, I'm like, dude, this entire game, now he's a crunch guy, so I'm like, dude, this game has the game mechanic of running up buildings, grabbing people and throwing them off the buildings, and if they hit the ground, that's damaging, and they could bounce and fall into a canal in Venice. And oh my god, the starter set was really, really, yes, fluff equals lore, crunch is mechanic. I let him know some of the mechanics and the things that we could do with the mechanics, and it turned out he had already kickstarted the thing. And I'm like, cool, I want to try and play this game. And the setting, I'm not a great big history buff. Okay, I'm really not. Some sort of fantasy or sci-fi element needs to be added to history for me to be all down. All right? This morning, I decided, for another friend of mine, to learn how to play bolt action, okay, from Warlord Games. And that is straight up historical wargaming from World War II. Straight up, right? And when I looked at it, I'm like, I don't like historical war games. Besides, who's gonna play the Nazi? Not me, But this is a big thing. I loved Conflict 47. Why? Lightning weapons and giant robots. Yeah. Old Two Eyes, I love that you're so interested. I love having new people in the channel. I am more a sci-fi fan. Primarily, where I live down here in Southern California, people of my hue that want to insert themselves into sci-fi come with a lot of resistance. Look up the fan reaction to the last Lord of the Rings television show and you'll understand what I mean. Where in sci-fi, anybody can be anywhere, and I dig it, okay? So yeah, the future, I always look toward the future. I wanted Skype and FaceTiming when I was 6 because the Jetsons promised it to me. Do I want flying cars? No, I don't want flying cars because people can't drive. And the last thing I want is for my friends that live on the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th stories of apartment complexes to end up waking up in the middle of the night of a drunk driver barreling through their bedroom. You dig? I mean, it's just one of those things. So yeah. But when I pitched it to another friend of mine, I'm like, you really like Assassin's Creed? Well, check it out. This is set in Venice in like the 1780s, and you can play thieves and aristocrats, but the Vatican is dealing with the fact that like some sort of portal opened up and demons are spilling through and magic has returned. And they're like, well, you had my attention, now you've got my interest. I'm like, yeah. So you can play a street urchin who gets to shank a corrupt priest, and they're like, oh, let's do this, you know. And then the gaming mechanics that came down, not very difficult gaming mechanics in that game. Really not a lot of hardcore crunch. And so it's a great game, especially on the skirmish level. All right. Now, a lot of the times, the fluff and the crunch don't match. Okay. And what do I mean by that? Well, let's set the Wayback Machine to 2004. I loved playing War Machine. I loved War Machine. I loved that game. I loved its mechanics. It was very cool. I didn't have to buy a bucket full of dice. Just 4 D6s was all I need. And I live in the hood, so I can buy D6s from the liquor store. All right? Yeah, that's right. LICKASTOW, the liquor store. All right? So I could go get myself a soda and some dice, and I'm good. Why did I bring up Privateer Press games? Because that was my main game for the long time. And again, War Machine was fantastic in its first few years when it was a skirmish game. And its fluff didn't match its crunch. And what do I mean by that? Its crunch was built for skirmish. Okay? Now, for those of you guys that aren't into mini wargaming, let me explain what I mean betwixt the twain, okay? A skirmish game is made for maybe 20 miniatures. That's all. 20. Okay? It's made for a board about the size of a coffee table, either 2x3, 3x3, or 4x4. Never any bigger than that. Okay? Never any bigger than that. And, it's made for easy rules, quick bring in, maybe an hour's worth of gameplay, and then you're done. Okay? Hours worth of gameplay. Might take an hour to set up the board depending on how much terrain you want. All right? That's a skirmish game. Skirmish games that you might be on the lookout for, you might come across, are things like Fallout Wasteland Warfare, practically everything from Osprey Games, like Gaslands, the Frostgrave series, being Frostgrave, Ghost Archipelago, Stargrave, we're talking Gaslands, we're talking Carnivale, all right, we're talking Kill Team, believe it or not, and of course, War Machine, all right? However, the fluff talked all the time, not about strike teams of steam-powered robots with a few couple of units from a mercenary force to help you take a city back from the horrifying forces of the undead, to epic war scale things with 70-meter robots stomping through on tanks. Their fluff-inspired people to try and play that game in an army sense. Okay? The fluff was amazing, but the crunch was designed for a small-scale game. And what happened? The thing that happened was when their crunch kept going more, or when their fluff kept going more and more epic, their crunch, their game mechanics, couldn't keep up. And then we fell from War Machine to infantry hordes. You know, it sold the game on steam-powered robots, and then when Hordes came out on great big war beasts that were telepathically controlled by wizards, to, well, you get bonuses if you take 5 units of this infantry guy and 6 units of this and blah, blah, blah. Yes, Xanathades, it collapsed under its own weight because its scaffolding, okay, its initial crunch was based on skirmish level combat. And then I believe it was 40k 7th edition came out, and all those players came into War Machine wanting to play Warhammer and trying to shove it into the square hole. And that was about when I got out of that was about when I got out of it. Yeah, perfectly said, Old Two Eyes. Big Warjacks sold the game, but big infantry units won it. Because, again, its fluff didn't match its crunch. You know, had they released a few novels, I'd say, let's see, that took about 6 years. So if there had been 3 or 4 novels that were released about small strike teams for people to really latch onto and care about it and create strike teams that were like them, sweet. You know, yes, they did make a video game. However, that video game was much closer to a real-time strategy game, and it didn't feel like War Machine. You get what I'm saying? And again, I miss it. I'll still play War Machine 2nd edition, using nothing but proxies if I could find somebody to play with. I even liked Mark III. I liked Mark III, but what I didn't like was the focus on infantry and how they had to adjust the fluff to keep up with what the players wanted to do based on the fluff that they used to do. And they didn't get the game mechanics going, so it kind of died. You know, where you have games like Warhammer 40k and Bolt Action and Firefight from Mantic Games. Those are based on war. As I said, a skirmish game, maybe 20 models at most, where a war game starts at 50 models, okay? And, you know, Mantic, I'm not gonna lie, they do it right. They have lore for both, actually for all 3 of their games, be it Warzone on the epic level war with a 6-foot table that you do all the things all the time, Firefight where it's kind of a 40k pastiche, and of course Dead Zone, my particular favorite, that is skirmish warfare that you play on a 2x2 foot board, or a coffee table as we like to call it, and it's got lore corresponding with each level of its game, okay? And when the crunch and the lore mesh up, you've got a good foundation to build a community around, okay? And that is really, see, I baited you guys in. Now here's the switch. This is how to build communities, okay? A consistent story that is consistent with the workings, okay? Hey, Panda, it's been a while. Yeah, a story that matches the actions that you take. Blurtish, what's up? Oh, wow, Blurtish, you played your first war game in the past week. Which one was it? Yeah, so when you're building communities, and I don't care what community you're trying to build, especially around your hobby, okay? We are talking, we are talking if you are building your community around comic books or card games or even Uno. Excuse me. If what you tell people that you're doing doesn't match up with what you actually do, your community will fall apart. Okay? You have to have that balance between your fluff and your crunch. If people come down to your place to spend time reading comic books and y'all want to play, and some people end up doing board games, you're going to lose the people that showed up to read comic books. Okay? Let's see. It's called Wargroove, a turn-based strategy game in the vein of Advanced Wars on Nintendo. Sweet. So you're playing a turn-based strategy game on a video game or a tabletop war game. Let me know. Yeah, I'm doing all right. You know, since you're my only Norwegian fan, I will allow you to call me Tribal Chief. You know. Because it has a different connotation where you are versus where I am, so that's all cool. So yeah. So when it comes down to that, you know, when your fluff and your lore have always got to sync up, and when you've got lore that says one thing and the fluff that has another, if you're already invested, okay, let's say you're already invested in something that you've been spending money on for years, and your closet is full up of stuff that you barely ever play with. You know, sounds like I'm talking crap on 40K, but Magic the Gathering's in there too. Game development and narrative writing aren't so easy to put together. You're absolutely right. But I'm not talking about developing games, okay? What I am talking about, and I can see where it looks like the skill sets aren't there, but when you're looking for a game and you're playing a game, and you're trying to get new people into games, okay? When you're teaching, you can adjust both the fluff and the crunch, okay? Let's use the biggest boy on the block that's out there. All right? Let's just use the biggest boy out there. When you're talking Warhammer 40K, you can introduce them how to play with Kill Team. Of course, right now they've got Combat Patrol, which I'm absolutely in love with, which is skirmish level Warhammer 40K, but it's been tweaked to just be skirmish level, and I dig that a lot. You don't have to tell them all 90 books of the Horus Heresy. You don't have to tell them the 50 books of Trazen the Immortal trying to take all the stuff in, okay? Oh, sweet, you bought a PC. And yeah, all right. Oh, it's on Nintendo Switch. Sweetness. And telling you, when I get out to that coast, man, when I get out to your neck of the South, I'm sitting you down and we're gonna play with some action figures. I'm telling you, that's gonna happen. You know, yeah, you don't have to tell them everything. We say here on the channel all the time, the easiest way to make sure someone doesn't learn anything is to try and teach them everything at one time. All right? When you're pitching the game, pitching your game group, trying to get new people in, the number one thing you got to do is balance that fluff and that crunch. Now, believe it or not, Games Workshop actually did do this correctly. How can I put this? Combat Patrol uses all of the basic rules, every single one of the basic rules of Warhammer 40K. Every single one of them. However, the faction rules have all been scaled back for that level of gameplay. All right? So you really get to learn how to play Warhammer 40K, but you don't really get all of the crunchy nuances, all that grit that would come around, that comes around with your factions. All right, you only get half of all of the advantages that make the Eldar over the top. You only get half of the Oath of Moments thing. When it comes to, say, buying a pre-constructed deck for Magic the Gathering, that has really scaled back. Oh yeah, GW has much better fluff than crunch. You know, but a pre-constructed deck in Magic the Gathering scales back the crunch, and it gives you a little packet that says what the fluff is if you are interested in it. you know. Now, I will say this. One thing I learned, and I think Neon Arlecchino can back me up on this, from playing HeroClix for years, was those of us that read comics and were familiar with the teams and the storylines that came out during that time may not have won as often as the people who turned the game into an exercise of statistical analysis and mathematic advantage. But we had more fun with it. You know, I still remember one of my favorite games against my friend who is a major Hulk fan, and he was like, the Hulk, do all this stuff, and his Hulk was an entire team, and I had the Doom Patrol, and I played the Doom Patrol the way they work in the comic books, and I did win the game, but even if I'd lost, I had fun because I was immersed and I felt like I was playing the Doom Patrol. Okay? Oh wow, you switched platforms. No, don't worry about it. Wait a second. I don't know. I think I can only be a video game guy in that vein. It's satisfying seeing your guys kill their guys when you make the right moves. We'll see. I mean, we'll see. I think you'd like tabletop wargaming way more than I think you'd like tabletop roleplay gaming. You know, the violent shooting the guy and then taking little figure off the table, that can be like all the jam, believe me. When I was playing Marvel Crisis Protocol, same thing. Yeah, you know, it was the same thing. I know the Avengers. I know the Cabal. My brother really knew the Avengers, and so we could do the Avengers versus the Cabal. But with that fluff and that crutch, tabletop minis games get this more than any other games in the genres outside of video games. They give you missions to set a narrative. Okay, guys? Like, seriously. You get secure this, go get the MacGuffin, rescue hostages. Therefore, if you don't know, all 58 books of the Horus Heresy, all 16 books of War Machine, all 22 books of Wild West Exodus, all 60 books of Deadlands, you know what you're doing for that game. Get what I mean? And you see, this right here, I don't care if it's a tabletop role-playing game or anything like that. When you create your own fluff for the game that you're playing at that moment, that fluff is the thing that stokes the imagination, that turns rolling dice into a game. It turns moving little figures into a game. Hell, turning rock, paper, scissors into a game. Okay? It's the narrative. The narrative. The fluff is very important, but it's got to be balanced with the mechanics. Now, what do I mean by that? Let's go back to HeroClix, but we'll go way back in the beginning. In 2004, when they released their very first set of DC HeroClix, okay? Their very first set. It was what a lot of players would call off balance, okay? In the sense of a rookie, just a really low beginning level Spider-Man could beat Superman. He could. Now, there is no universe where if those two fight, Peter Parker would live. Peter Parker would not end up unconscious. Okay? You can at me all you want. Spider-Man versus Superman, that ain't fair. How do we know? Has Spider-Man ever actually fought the Hulk in a one-on-one? Or Thor? Or anyone from the Squadron Supreme? No! That's not Spidey's power level. Okay? And what had happened that turned a lot of people off to that was the fluff of the comic books of the 60 to 70 years of comic books that everyone had known did not balance with the crunch of the game mechanics of HeroClix. And the game tanked for the longest time. For the longest time. It got better. It got better over time, okay? HeroClix now, great game. But it did get better. Yeah, exactly. Yes, Spidey could never beat Superman. But yeah, so, 62 and 63 and 1. It was a test to see if he could join the Avengers. Oh, okay. Thank you, Neon. I stand corrected. I actually do remember that. I thought he had only fought Cap and Iron Man. But yeah. So that I don't remember how if I recall correctly, Spider-Man beat Superman in that crossover because Superman was really pulling his punches, and I thought it ended in a draw when they realized they had to go against Lex Luthor and Doc Ock. So yeah. But either way, well, the big thing I'm talking about here is that in those early days of Clicks, the fluff and the lore did not match, and people stopped liking the game. Okay? Till it got bought out by another company that actually really cared about comics and really cared about the game. Okay? So when it comes down to that, we have an example of when the fluff and the crunch don't match in early HeroClix and, of course, War Machine and Privateer Press. Okay? And fluff that does match the crunch very well in games like Dead Zone, Firefight, Kill Team, Warhammer 40k, Horus Heresy, Frostgrave, Stargrave, Gaslands. A lot of these games have the fluff and the crunch that match. And all of these games have the good balance between the two. But what if they don't? Okay, what if they don't? And we're invested. Like I said, when you have a closet full of Magic cards, half a room full of an old minis game that you don't play anymore because you don't like it. And I'm not just talking about 40k. I'm talking about stuff like Conflict 47, Dead Zone, War Machine, lots of different miniatures games and stuff out there. How do you repurpose these things or maybe play older editions? You have to sell your friends on the fluff, okay? The number one thing, you got to get people excited to play the thing that you like. And the way that you get people excited is not really with crunch. Some people will get into the crunch, like when I told my best friend about Carnivale. All right? Yeah, he likes the crunch. However, I even had to tell him the crunch within the confines of fluff. You always have to tell a story. People like stories, okay? When you hear a story, you get engaged. That's why we watch TV. Most of the time, that's why we play video games other than fighting games. And I say that because fighting games are really the only games that can really exist on mechanics more than story. Okay? And I mean, I'm old, okay? I'm old. I didn't know the story about Mortal Kombat when Mortal Kombat first came out. Same with Pit Fighter, same with Street Fighter. Like I said, I'm old. And if your people are brand new, they've never played these types of games before, like what I plan on doing with Blurtish when I get to his part of the US, it's super important to balance out the fluff and the crunch. Now, if this means a starter game, okay, a starter game with the basic rules, one of the old what the number one rule with teaching hero clicks back in the old days was no powers. Do not let them use powers. Let them get the game mechanics and the turn sequence and all that stuff down, and yeah, no powers. Unfortunately, that didn't really hook a lot of people that knew comic books, because why couldn't Green Lantern just? And Wolverine wouldn't do that, okay? So that's another example of the crunch and the fluff not really meeting up. Where was I going with this? Okay. So when you get your new people in, you've got to scale back the crunch. How do we do this? How do we scale back the crunch or scale back the fluff to keep everything where we can keep our new players interested and not overwhelmed? That's that needle. Okay? If they're interested, okay? If they're interested, or if they lose interest and end up on this side of this little finger, they'll just wander off. They'll pull out their phone. They'll change the subject. They'll start talking about other stuff. But when they're overwhelmed, they'll do the same thing. I can't tell you how many people are like, nah, man, that's too much. Nah, that requires too much thinking. But to show them, to say, dude, all right, you got these, done. The dude I'm teaching how to play Dead Zone right now, he loves the enforcers. He loves them. Because he's a big fan of Halo, and the minis look like Halo figures. And that's cool. And they actually play a lot like Master Chief and the other guys would, which is kind of neat. So when it comes to that kind of thing, yeah. I teach him how to play the game. We play small, like 100-point games or so. And I create the teams because he's not at that level yet. Okay, but he is getting into the fluff. Okay, the whole idea of interstellar colonization, but you have limited resources. He's all in on that. The fact that all the terrain looks like cargo containers because those are the easiest things to take interstellarly. He's all in on that. And he's always interested in playing unless he's working. This is how we built that community. Now, when you've got, when you're playing with new players, okay? Again, I don't care what kind of game you're playing. To load them down with the entire history of the whole world will 86% of the time guarantee that you won't be getting around to play. Okay? Here's an example. Ever sit down with a new D&D player and you want to play D&D with them and you let them make their first character? That is an entire session 0. Matter of fact, it happens so often, it has a name. Session 0. Okay? But when they start to make their own characters, there is so much crunch that's involved in it. And when people create their first teams or their first characters, they're not going to be optimized with the fluff, but they're not going to be optimized with the crunch, but they will have fluff in their head, and when we're sitting down with new players, guys, it is really important, if we want them to stay around, to try and keep the game a good percentage within the headcanon that they come up with. Okay? We see it all the time with every single player that wants to play D&D 5th edition, pick a monk character, and put Naruto together. But they want to put Naruto from season 5 as their first level character. Y'all know what I'm talking about. When they can't do that, when the game mechanics that are going down that they play with don't match up with the fluff that they've created, then they lose interest. Hang on, do I ever play with that person who refuses to learn the rule and asks what their role is every time? Yes, I do. Since you're relatively new, Old Two Eyes, I'll put it out there. I specialize in new players. I'm always building clubs. I'm always building communities. And that means most of the D&D games that I run, most of the skirmish games that I play, well, most of the D&D games that I run barely ever last till level 7. Okay? And I say barely because, again, the headcanons that people get interested in, it's a big thing. Let's see. Neon Arlecchino was in a session where someone had a meltdown because they didn't feel like they should be able to miss a basic attack on a spider due to their character's background. Exactly. The fluff didn't match the crunch. And why do I keep putting this out there? Why have I focused an entire episode on this? It's very simple. The 21st century is a hellscape. Everything is about selling the next product, okay? And all advertising is compelling fluff. That's what it is, y'all. Sorry to be the bearer of that kind of tiding, okay? But it really is fluff that is super compelling. And what do I mean by that? It's really simple, all right? Every advertisement tells a story. And, you know, when you look at a commercial, like when I was a kid, there was a board game called Guess Who. And in its first iterations, the pictures on the little cards, because it was a game about description, so it's like, does your person have a beard? No. All right. Turn down all the people that have beards. Is your person a man? You know. But on the commercials, they talked. Okay? They were animated. They had talking. And people were like, oh my God, I want to deal with the talking board game. And then it didn't talk. People got mad to the point where Milton Bradley, later on Hasbro, had to put a disclaimer on the commercial. Pictures on the game do not talk. Okay? It is still a fun game, Neon. But the commercial, the advertisements tend to set a narrative in the heads of the customers to go, oh my God, I can't live without this. You know? Like I said, when I was a teenager, it was the 90s. And the call sign in the 90s was extreme, you know, but now everything is epic. Epic battles where titans meet on the battlefield, you know, and doesn't feel epic. Feels like you're waiting to get a sandwich while your friend moves all of his little miniatures, and then you get to roll some dice maybe. Or it doesn't feel epic because you're waiting for your turn while that guy is saying, okay, hang on, I want to talk to the person on the next bar stool, you know. So yeah. And a lot of the times, playing a D&D game or any type of role-playing game, in practice, it's a lot of sitting around and listening to people talk. And then we set this narrative, or we give the fluff of what happened when we're talking to our friends or people at the gaming store, or sometimes people at work when they're sitting up going, oh yeah, man, I played this game this weekend and we got attacked by a basilisk and 3 of my guys got turned into stone. But then I finally got myself a mirror and blah, blah, blah. You see what I mean? What we leave out was that one person that wanted to talk to every single person sitting at the bar in the tavern. You know, that person, you know, that murder hobo, that, you know, that person that wants to go into every house and break every single potted plant to see if they can find a little money. Y'all know what I'm talking about. You know, so yeah. And again, this is a real important thing, because again, the fluff, the advertisements, the settings, and the stories that people tell to garner interest. You're absolutely right. They do tend to be, you had to be their stories, right? And we get into all these things to generate the you had to be their stories, or more to the point, to generate the experiences that cause the memories and the feelings of the stories that we would tell later. Okay? I mean, this stuff is fun. This stuff is fun and compelling and engaging. However, things have to balance out. All right? When I get people down to play a tabletop minis game, you know, one of the things I do, especially when they're new, Myth Force. I'll check it out. One of the things I do is, I run commentary. I make my dudes, I make my dudes make little noises. You know, when I move my tanks, I'm like, and I'm like, oh yeah, I see what you're doing. And I give little guys names. You know, in the game I played the other day, I think it was Saturday, I left my guy with a straight, clear line of sight. And in Dead Zone, that gives a lot of bonuses. And I'm like, oh, he moved up, and he's like, hey, buddy, how you doing? So, have you guys heard the good news? You know, you wouldn't hit a guy with glasses, you know. And he was laughing. Thank you, Blurtish. I'll pull that up real quick. Myth Force, huh? So yeah, I mean, that really is, you know, and when that happened, you know, I mean, I actually made him laugh, because he shot one of my dudes, and so I had my leapers, like, swarm him. I'm like, yeah, you see, you shot my dude, but then he threw his hat up in the air, and all the other dudes came by to swarm them, and he was on the ground, you know, and, He-Man and Gauntlet, huh? Let's see, Myth Force. So yeah. And it's a gameplay overview. I just impressions. I just want the little I'm gonna see if there's okay. Alright. The release date reveal trailer. Alright, yeah, let's take a look. Yeah, that's why the hobby is so important for 40K. Painting and modeling offers that customization that keeps people coming back. Yeah. Sometimes, well, it keeps some people from coming back. It also scares off a lot of people. Again, I was watching Tanya the War Mistress while I was writing the show today, and she actually asked the question, what do you guys think of when you're painting? Like, what's your motivation? And I made it very clear. I'm a get her done painter. I'm all about playing games. And it's been a little hard coming up with my tutorial show, because I actually don't play nearly as many games as stuff that I craft and paint in preparation for games. But I got to put content on here and all that stuff. So yeah, it's been a thing. I'm still trying to figure out what terrain I'm going to be building and putting on the Patreon. But I'm working on it. I'm working on it. So, but yeah, let's check out this Myth Force release date trailer from Xbox real quick. Let's see what we got here. Just want to make sure. Boop. Yeah, want to make sure I get a good thing going. There we go. Boop, boop. Whoa. I said pause. Display capture. There we go. Yeah, let's take a look at this. I'm going to turn off the thing. Actually, I'm probably going to turn it down, because I don't know if the music will get me a content strike. So let's take a look here. You see what I mean about this fluff, guys? And see, video games are interesting when it comes to the fluff and the crunch, because the fluff that video... Oh, hey, girl. How you doing? So, the fluff in video games, and the main fluff in video games, let's be really real. We call them cutscenes. Alright, yeah, this looks nice and animated, and, or, you know, it looks closer to hand animated than normal CGI stuff does. Myth Force. Alright, pretty sweet. September 12th. Xbox, sponsor me! No, so yeah, and yeah, I mean, that right there, it's a really interesting thing. Oh, this is too look like Saturday morning show. I kind of dig it. I kind of dig it, but, you know, you and I, Blurtish, we grew up on the Saturday morning times, you know. For you young people out there, before streaming services, all TV was appointment TV, and Saturday morning was the day to watch cartoons. You know, and then when you got full of your sugary cereal and the cartoons went off and sports came on, that's when your mom would make you get up and vacuum stuff. Another thing that'll upset you and you'll love it. Yeah, probably, because video games can be frustrating. But yeah, so seriously, you know. So yeah, so I want you guys just to keep that stuff in mind. When it comes to when it comes to the games that you like, okay? And when they say the hobby, and they mean Warhammer 40K, the modeling part, you know, the putting together the minis and painting everything, that's part of the crunch too. All right, that is really part of the crunch, which is why their fluff has got to be so epic, because you have to be so hyped in playing the Horus Heresy that you're willing to put this stuff together and try and paint it and make it look like the box art, and realize that you didn't go to art school and all of that stuff, you know. So... Oh yeah, Vox Machina is the stuff. So, so the next time you really think about the stuff that you're into, all right, ask how much of the fluff, actually keeps you in it. I can tell you, my friends that play video games and old-time viewers of the channels knows I don't, because I got priced out at the PlayStation 2, and I do this. So I don't really have the time to spend my editing bay playing video games, and the video games that tend to be out nowadays that are worth talking about requires hardware that I can't afford. But you know, I've got the 3D printing and I've got the editing, so that's already a lot on my plate. But when you talk about your video games and stuff like that, you know, do you tell the stories of what happened in game or what buttons you pushed? You know, that's how fluff is so important. All the stories that we tell fall into the fluff. And the stories that the producers of whatever game we're playing in whatever medium we're playing, the stories that they tell are the things that keep us into it. Of course, the caveat are the games that we grew up with, like Monopoly and Scrabble and stuff like this. Yeah, $20 indie games. I'm definitely with you. You know, but the real, you know, yeah, the stories we tell fall into the fluff. Augustus Gloop falls into the chocolate. I was waiting for the bad dad joke. I was waiting. There it is. But keep in mind that all the stories that you tell, all the things that keep you invested, you know, the simplest story is, did I finally beat Kyle? Kyle being the person that you never win when you play against, or Kyle being the level that you can't get past. Okay? Um, but we very rarely talk about the crunch, the game mechanics. But when the fluff and the crunch are balanced out, that is when we have time enjoying games. Okay? There are lots of games that have okay fluff and way too crunchy. It's like trying to eat chocolate covered gravel. It just does not freaking work. Okay? And I'm serious about that. Just the game mechanics are like, what is all this stuff? Like the DC Universe game from Night Models. I love that game, but its learning curve is too high because it's so crunchy. And its stat cards look more like a character sheet from Dungeons and Dragons or Call of Cthulhu. However, I'm so invested in the fluff. So invested in the fluff that I was willing to stick it out. And I do like the minis. You see what I mean? But it's not a game that I teach people very often. Because there are so many, this is a definite rule except for this, and then they turn from edge cases of when the rule doesn't apply to edge cases of when the rules do apply. And that's just too crunchy. I did not know that the highest difficulty in Killer Instinct 13 is Kyle. Wow, that was kind of cool. Yes, I'm pulling knowledge from the ether. But yeah, so guys, when it comes down to this, when you're thinking about getting someone into something that you're trying to do, think about the fluff. And when the fluff is the thing that gets people interested, the fun that you can have with the game, the setting of the game, the pleasant experiences that you've had in the past playing the games, always make sure that you can balance the crunch with the fluff. Okay, yes, use the fluff to bring them into the fold, but don't oversell. You know, you have to come up with the, oh yeah, no, you can totally do that if you do this. All right. So yeah, that is one of the biggest things. The fluff gets people in the door, but the crunch determines whether or not they stay in the room. And if a game is too crunchy, they're going to bail. You know, if the doing of something is more complicated than the experience of it, it's really not worth it. If you don't believe me, read 40% of the work from the writer Grant Morrison, my favorite comic writer currently. That's not Alan Moore, but so crunchy. Crunch, nom, 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 nom. Because we want to play games and read comics and watch movies and not read stereo instructions. You know, again, every role-playing game that you'll ever get comes in the form of a textbook. Even if it's a pamphlet, it's like a textbook that you had from school. There are charts, there are numbers. Tabletop minis games, same. So many charts, so much math. But the fluff is the thing that hides it. You know. Yes, team building excels. Yeah, a $1 game and it was killing you. I know. All these theories go all the way across the board. I don't care what hobby you're into, okay? People practice photography with their cell phones because they get it. Do they know aperture, light exposure, white balance, dark balance? Do they know what crushing the black is, color correction, or how to use Adobe Lightroom? No, most people don't. But they do know point and click. Okay, that's why Instagram exists, right? So, yeah. And what's the fluff and the crunch there? I took a picture with my phone. I put this filter on it. Done. The crunch? Oh yeah, I have a black. I have a Blackmagic handheld video camera there, and I set the aperture. I had to set the aperture to 1.4, but then I had to adjust the white balance here. Now, once I put it on a gimbal, and it's like no one cares. They just like the way the shot looked. You know what I mean? Yeah. So seriously speaking, guys, try and make sure that the fluff that you're into is balanced with the crunch of how to get it done. Okay. When you're showing somebody how to play a game, showing them how to take pictures on a cell phone, showing them whatever, most people nowadays learn more from interacting than they do from reading the manual. And I will tell you this, most people that you will talk to get involved in the hobbies, if you have to talk to them about the hobby, they haven't read the manual. And if they have read the manual, they'll either come to you with questions or they won't. And they'll just want to join you in doing the thing. You know? But if you're trying to get people into what you're doing, don't give them too much fluff. You know, when you're looking at an illustration, you don't need to know if they used Photoshop to make it or if they did it with pens and pencils. And if you do need to know, ask yourself the question, do you need to know what kind of pencil? Was it a number 2, number 3? Was it from Femco? Was it a special pencil that they had to get from the art store with a graphite lead that had a certain softness or anything of it? Or was it a number 2 pencil that they got from the Dollar Tree? You see what I mean? You know, most of the time we don't need to know that. Most people don't know what Michelangelo made his paints from. They just know the Merovingian Man is a sketch. Most people don't really care. They really, really don't care what program was used to make Arcane. They like watching it. They like the story. Okay, that fluff gets us in. The crunch is important for interacting with it. Or doing it yourself, and that's a totally different subject. But that is our time, and I want to thank you guys for being here and being so interactive today. Major shout outs to all you guys. This has been really awesome. Okay, serious thanks to Blurtish, Neon Arlecchino, Xanathades, and Old Two Eyes. Thank you guys for interacting. Thank you guys for showing up. We will be back in a couple of days. And if y'all found any value, any whatsoever, from what we're doing here, help me stay open, please. I need to pay my mortgage. There's a donation button at the top, our Patreon in the second, or our merch. Matter of fact, when I get some spare income, I'm actually buying a Back in the Deck coffee cup because I drink coffee on air, and y'all should be seeing my little logo here, and I just haven't had the money to do it because I'm broke. So seriously, help a brother out, do all that stuff. Also, subscribe to the Blurtish YouTube channel. All right, Mr. Cooper does a whole lot of cool stuff. Really, real good friend to the channel. He and I are on panels on Nerd Soul very often. That's NERDSOUL. Subscribe to them, but subscribe here on Twitch with Jeff Bezos's money. Use your Amazon Prime account to subscribe here. All right, guys. But with that, thank you, everybody. And if y'all want to get a hold of me, okay, it's really, really easy. Okay, and I mean that. All you got to do, if y'all want to get a hold of me, is pull up your keyboard and type in backinthedeck@gmail.com. That's BACKINTHEDECK @gmail.com. You can also reach out to me over on Twitter @backinthedeck. Hit me up on Instagram @backinthedeck. You can also hit me up on the Clock app @bidp. Join the group Deckers on the Book. And guess what, guys? If y'all missed this episode and want to hear more in the archives, look us up on Spotify, and on SoundCloud and the other places that you can find your podcast. What? That's right. The audio-only versions of these are on those platforms. And of course, join the Patreon to get some of our exclusive content there. That is where I'm putting my crafting videos, okay? Crafting videos are going to be put up on Patreon so that The people that want to learn how to build terrain and paint and all that stuff, they can get something out of that. And yeah, that's some really cool stuff. And there I'm doing the editing and all that stuff, so we can have 10-15 minute videos and all that jazz. But in the meantime, if anybody tells you that y'all can't like what you like because of the circumstances of your birth, be it race, religion, creed, gender identity, sexual orientation, disability, neurodivergency, or your budget, because anybody who's ever been to a trailer park knows that it's still walking distance from the hood, you can tell those people to take those cards and put them back in the deck. This is Solar Gray, the Cinematic Sorcerer, saying thank you, and we will see you next time on the dark side of